A strong national alternative in Russia today would mobilize the physical, economic, and human resources of the nation. It would commit itself to a bold program of institutional innovation. And on this basis, it would allow the country to engage the global political and economic order without contradicting its own interests or renouncing its collective originality. Such a national alternative would be composed of at least 8 large projects of national construction. The first project would ensure an independent basis for the financing of national development. Russia should never be on its knees, dependent on the interests and favors of foreign capital or foreign power. The wealth of natural resources, including of oil and gas, should be used to invest in the future, in the expansion of productive capacity, and in the education of the people. The operational expenses of the state should be funded by a high and stable tax take. And popular needs, rather than being dealt with through ad hoc subsidies, financed again by natural resource extraction, should have their basis, above all, in a sustained broadening of economic and educational opportunity. The second large project should be the democratizing of the market economy. It is not enough to regulate the market. It is not enough to compensate for the inequalities generated in the market by resorting to retrospective redistribution through tax and transfer. It is necessary to change the market in its institutional content and its legal expression so that more people have more access to more markets in more ways. The institutional reconstruction of the market economy is the real condition for social inclusion and for the sustained broadening of economic opportunity. That means a reinvention of industrial policy. Russia cannot advance by simply superimposing on its oil and gas sector, or more generally on primary production, a sector of high technology isolated from the rest of the national economy. Technology and science must be instruments to serve the structural transformation of every sector of the system of production. The main beneficiaries of the new industrial policy should be the multitude of small and medium-sized firms that produce most of the output and create the vast majority of jobs. The method should be to expand access in favor of these enterprises to credit, to technology, to advanced practice and advanced knowledge. And the condition for the flourishing of this inclusive but advanced productivism is the gradual development of a new institutional framework. On the vertical axis, in the relations between the government and private firms, what should be advanced is a new form of decentralized strategic coordination, between the state and private business. A form that is pluralistic, participatory, and experimental, and that takes as its task to disseminate the advanced productive practices and the superior technology and science through large sectors of the national economy. There is no need to choose between the two models of government-business relations that are now available in the world. The American model of arm's-length regulation of business by government, and the Northeast Asian model of formulation of unitary trade and industrial policy imposed top-down by the bureaucratic apparatus of the state. On the horizontal axis, in the relations among firms, especially small and medium-sized businesses, the state should seek to support new regimes of cooperative competition so that these firms can cooperate with one another, pooling resources and achieving economies of scale, even as they continue to compete against one another. Agriculture is not simply an exception. Agriculture can be a vanguard of this new economic model. Science and technology can be transferred to small and medium-sized firms only within an institutional framework like the one that I have just described. A framework characterized by decentralized strategic coordination between government and business, and by cooperative competition among businesses. A third project of national construction would enlist finance in the service of production. Finance can be a good servant, but it is a bad master. In all the contemporary market economies, the production system is largely self-financed on the basis of the retained and reinvested earnings of private firms. What then is the point of all of that money in the banks and the stock markets? Theoretically, it is to finance production. In fact, finance as it is now organized uses the transactions of the real economy as a pretext to serve its own interests. What we should want is to make finance serve the real economy rather than allowing it to serve itself. The way to advance this goal is to bring about a series of innovations in taxation and in regulation that would discourage financial activity that has no plausible relation to the expansion of output and the enhancement of productivity. Another initiative is to develop the innovations that would more effectively channel long-term saving into long-term productive investment, exploiting, for example, the dormant productive potential of the vast amount of capital stored in the public and private pension systems, to invest in emergent and innovative enterprise. A fourth project of national construction is to bring about a radical change in the character and quality of public education. A democratized market economy and a deepened democracy require capable citizens. Education must be analytic and problem solving in its method, rather than oriented to information and to memory. It must use information selectively and deeply as an instrument for the acquisition of analytic capabilities. It must anticipate the cooperative methods of advanced science to the earliest stages of teaching and learning, and reject the combination of individualism and authoritarianism that continues to characterize the classroom. And it must be dialectical in its approach to the received body of knowledge, teaching every subject from at least two contrasting points of view. In a country that is large, unequal, and federal in structure, the advancement of such a radical educational alternative requires the achievement of another goal: to reconcile the local management of the schools with the engagement of local communities with national standards of investment and quality. A fifth project of national construction is the enhancement of the quality of public services, including the services of health and education. Public services make people. Now, what we have generally available in the world today is the provision of standardized, low-quality public services by the bureaucracy. Low quality in the sense that they are of lower quality than the analogous services that can be bought on the market by people who have money. The only alternative to this bureaucratized provision of low-quality public services appears to be the privatization of public services in favor of profit-driven firms. There is, however, yet another option, which should become increasingly important in the 21st century and can have a central role in Russia. The other option is for the state to prepare, equip, finance, and coordinate independent civil society so that it share in the competitive and experimental provision of public services. That is the best way, not only to enhance the quality of the services, but also to inspire the self-organization of civil society outside the state. The state would provide a universal minimum of services, operating, as it were, on the floor. And the state might act as well at the ceiling, experimenting with the most advanced and costliest public services. But in the broad space between the floor and the ceiling, the state would work as the partner of civil society. A sixth project of national construction is to provide an adequate practical basis for social solidarity, for the cohesion of the country. The country should not be a collection of tribes. It should unite around a national project. Today, in the rich Western countries, the only basis of social solidarity is the organization of money transfers through social programs by the state. But money is too weak a social cement. The only adequate basis for social cohesion is direct responsibility to take care of other people, of the very young, of the very old, of the needy, of the infirm, of the vulnerable, outside the boundaries of one's own family. Direct engagement. Every able-bodied adult should have at least two positions in society: a job in the system of production and a social responsibility. Social service, even mandatory social service, could, for example, be an alternative to mandatory military service. A seventh project of national construction is the organization of an effective state. And an effective state depends on the implementation, the simultaneous implementation of three agendas associated with 3 centuries. The first agenda is a 19th century agenda of bureaucratic professionalism, the organization of a meritocratic civil service. That is a 19th century goal that to this very day, no country in the world has fully implemented. The 20th century agenda is an agenda of administrative efficiency. To reinvent for the public sector standards and practices of efficiency that are typically associated with the private sector. In an age in which mass production ceases to be the dominant style of industry and gives way to flexible, innovative production, the standard becomes higher, not just for the private economy, but for the state. Forms of benchmarking, of assessment of performance, of continual revision of the methods of the operation of the state in the light of experience. The third agenda of development of the state is a 21st century agenda of experimentalism. On the one side, a new form of federalism, a cooperative federalism that allows the different levels of the state to cooperate in experimental initiatives and permits particular localities or sectors to opt out of the general solutions under certain conditions and to create counter models of the national future. And on the other hand, as I suggested before, the engagement of civil society together with the state in the experimental and competitive provision of public services. The 8th project of national construction is the development of a high-energy democracy. A democracy that facilitates the repeated practice of structural reform, that weakens the power of the past over the future, and that no longer requires crisis as the condition of change. Such a democracy should be able to reconcile a strong power of central decision in the state with the expansion of pluralism in politics and of experimentalism in society. We need, therefore, a series of institutional innovations that would first heighten the temperature of politics, the level of organized popular engagement in political life, facilitating access to the means of mass communication in favor of the social movements and the political parties. We need a series of constitutional innovations that would prevent impasse among the political branches of government, through comprehensive programmatic plebiscites or early elections. And we need to exploit the experimentalist potential of the federal system so that the country can experiment with different versions of its future in different parts of itself. The 8 projects that I have outlined define the possible content of a strong national alternative. They are not a blueprint. They are a direction. In every programmatic proposal, what matters most is the direction, and then the selection of the first steps by which to begin to move in that direction. One might ask, is there in Russia today a real basis for such a national alternative? Indeed, there is. It is possible to develop around these 8 projects and the strong agenda that they together compose a productivist alliance, an alliance of industrialists, of farmers, of technical and scientific cadres, and above all, of workers. A productivist alliance to serve as a counterweight to the interests of profiteers, of parasites, of rentiers. The problem is not that such an alliance is impossible. The problem is that this alliance and this project still lack an intellectual formulation and a political voice. Two groups continue to exercise an exorbitant influence on the political life of the nation. One group seeks to defend the current apparatus of the state as the salvageable residue of the Soviet Union. Its legitimate concern is to prevent the collapse of the state, to preserve the margin of maneuver of the Russian people in the future. But this overriding security concern is today sterile because it lacks a programmatic vision. It is bereft of a project for the structural transformation of the country, a project that could equip the majority of the Russian people and provide them with the economic and educational instruments to make something of their lives. The other group is the group that has been disillusioned with all of the institutional and intellectual residue of the Soviet Union, and that finds in this disillusionment a pretext for submission to the neoliberal ideas prevailing in the West, and a pretext as well for individual profiteering. What the country needs is the emergence of a third group, a group of patriots who can embrace and develop a strong national alternative such as the one that I have just described. Courage is not enough. It must be allied to vision, and above all, to institutional imagination. Imagination, imagination to the rescue. On the emergence of this third group depends the future of the nation.